All right, so we are back to our book. Chapter 7 on skin is now also the beginning of the next part, part 3. Part 3 entitled Outside and Inside. And so I guess between our skin and our bones, we're going to cover the outsides and the insides of our bodies. But starting off today with skin and touch and sensitivity and just how critical it all really is. So why don't I pray and we'll get started. Heavenly Father, thank you that we can gather to read and to think and to discuss. Your word says that we are held in the palm of your hand. So as we consider our own skins and that touch, to hold and to touch as we do every day, may it be an opportunity to not only delight in your creation, but to learn and grow toward you as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So it's like a fourth or fifth grade science question to say what is the largest organ of the body, and it's one of those things that doesn't always register immediately. You think, oh, the liver's probably really big, or maybe the lungs, but it's your skin. The largest organ of your body is your skin. We don't tend to think of it, I think, in those terms quite as easily. At least I certainly didn't for a long time. But it's amazing to think not only how large it is in terms of surface area and what it comprises of our body, but basically we don't understand ourselves without our skin. Without our skin and just being, a bunch of goo wrapped around bones, we have nothing to go off of as far as who we understand ourselves to be. Not just the way we look. We wouldn't look the same to ourselves or to others without any skin on, obviously. But this whole chapter is about the sensitivity and the touch. So without that ability, what would we know and understand about ourselves and about the world around us? So of all the things that Dr. Brand could use to sort of open up a discussion on the skin, I just thought it was interesting that the sort of subtitle to our chapter is the organ of sensitivity. And I don't normally think that way. If you figured, okay, we're going to talk about the skin for a little while, and we want a subtitle to kind of sort of set the tone or to get us in the mood or to remind us where we're going, I wouldn't have thought about sensitivity. What would you think about if we were going to talk about the skin? We hadn't read the chapter yet. It's going to be about skin, and we need to come up with a quick, punchy little sentence to sort of set up talking about skin. What might you think of?
Holding it all in.
Holding it all in. Yeah, okay. That works. Yeah, I mean, I would be tempted to think in terms of either what we see or in terms of like the wrapper of our bodies, holding it all in, like you said. The quote that comes in the beginning of the part 3 talks about a seamless body stocking. Our skin is the casing in which the sausage of ourselves is contained. And so there's kind of a utilitarian, I think, understand the skin is what keeps it all together, keeps it all in. And just as importantly, it keeps it all out. The vast majority, almost everything as far as, what are the, potential of infections and the germs and our, it's not our white blood cells, which is the defense of the vast majority of contagions. It's our skin.
protects us from things like heat and cold.
Yeah, it protects us from heat and cold. And it protects us from germs and viruses. It protects us from infections. It protects us from all sorts of stuff. And anyway, all that sort of ran around my head when I okay, we're going to talk about skin, but it's interesting that he has chosen something that feels like a little bit of a surprise to me, but obviously the rest of the chapter really carries it out, and it's about sensitivity. But it's 100%. You know, without our skin, little nerve receptors that are in different places and in different configurations with different levels of sensitivity, we would basically be numb to the outside world. We could see and we could hear and we could speak. But, anyone who has any kind of neuropathy, anybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Whether it's something chronic and you know, profound, or whether it's something as simple as when your foot falls asleep, or if you sleep funny on your arm, and it's like it's like it's cut off from the world for a little while, and there's nothing you can do about it. So maybe it makes sense that the guy who spent most of his professional life caring for leprosy patients and understanding that so much of the damage to their bodies was because they couldn't feel, would have this particular insight into skin as the organ of sensitivity above everything else. All right, so what did you take from that first opening illustration? He always seems to open up with a little story about either his training or him training other doctors. What was this one for you?
I think it's kind of fun, the idea of his warm hand laid on the patient's belly.
Okay, kind of fun with the warm hand laid on the patient's belly. Yeah, it's a really neat little story, a very insightful little story, I think, because there was so much to it. There was so much clinical experience into something that seems so simple. Number one, he was kind of hiding the hot water bottle in his hand, and you know, as you're reading it for the first time, you're thinking it's for his comfort. Like, it's cold out here, and I've got a water bottle up against my body because I'm kind of keeping myself warm. But he's actually done that for diagnostic purposes, that he's figured out through all of this experience just how much his touch can pick up if he will sort of isolate it. Now, if his hands are cold and he put it on their stomach, what are they going to do?
And so,
Hands up.
Yeah, they tense up, and I mean, so do we.
Retract.
You know, one of my favorite things to do on cold days is to get real close to Lula, and either with cold hands or even better, cold feet, find some soft spot on her body and make her jump. So, you know, when you think about that sort of reflexive action about a cold hand on your stomach, I mean, clearly every single one of us would sort of tense up without even trying to. But the warm hand, maybe a little unexpected, but there's not that reflexive action to guard. That's actually what it's called clinically, is guarding. And I remember having to learn a few of the, you know, abdominal palpations and some of the clinical signs you could detect, you know, from touching the abdomen or the stomach in certain areas, or listening or feeling. But this doctor, Dr. Williams, I mean, he just had it down to the science. Go on your knees. Don't stand over them. You remember that?
Yes.
Because just the act of kind of being downward gravity, you would feel the pressure instead of feeling what's underneath. And all of the things that he could figure out just by feeling. What were some of the things that you remember him being able to do?
If there's a mass or
A mass.
a growth, he could
Absolutely,
feel
a
it.
mass or a growth. 100%.
Even the shape of it.
Even the shape of it. He could feel inflammations. I can say, and I've done this, you can feel the digestive process, and if it's at the appropriate level of activity, you can, if it's hot, unnaturally hot or hot in certain areas. I mean, all these little things you can pick up on. And the real interesting thing was when he said these very sophisticated diagnostic tests and the imaging equipment, everything else, were basically confirming what this guy could pick up just from laying his hand on somebody. And to think of how amazing that is. It reminded me for a second of like dogs that can be trained to pick up certain scents in a medical setting. Like there are certain dogs that can smell types of cancer. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
And I think there was a European country that was using dogs at airports to detect COVID. That there was some sort of discernible scent to dogs that someone who had the virus that they could actually pick up on. And it was way more effective and it was way faster than running like a swab test of some sort. Yeah, so anyway.
I also heard of dogs that could detect a diabetic about to crash.
Right, that's right. That's right. As they're blowing off those ketones, a dog could pick it up. That it would take some relatively sophisticated equipment to figure out. Okay, very cool. So as he is kind of moving on from there and talking about the skin, that next section, the ever adapting skin, there's just that neat medical insight about the varying levels of sensitivity in different parts of the body. What do you recall from that section? What stood out to you?
That business about the mosquito landing on his arm rather than a hand.
Right.
My dad and I had very, very dry skin when we were in Michigan and cold weather. And when warm weather came around, mosquitoes ignored us completely.
Huh.
And I think it was just because we were so dry and uninteresting.
So Mary Lou talking about living in Michigan and the very cold times with their she and her dad had naturally dry skin. They were really feeling the cold weather, but when the warm weather came, the mosquitoes would leave them alone because you're just so dry, probably just not very interesting to a mosquito. And so that section about the mosquito landing on your arm maybe can get away with it. But landing somewhere else that was more sensitive and you would feel it instantly. Last night, during Compline, the bugs were out in force. And I thought with that little cold snap, I'd be in better shape. They were everywhere. And of course, like 3 minutes in, I sucked one into my mouth. I mean, all the way in. I mean, I don't know. He must have just went for it. And I'm almost choking on it. And looking around, every now and again, I could see them land on different spots. I mean, there were just a bunch of them. But there were others that I didn't have to wonder. As soon as they touched down, I could feel it, and I would want to slap or swat or brush them away or something. And how amazing to think, like if you could see the map of sensation around our bodies, how it would intensify in these specific areas. And if you think about it, I mean, it makes a lot of practical sense. About the feeling way more pressure on the bottom of your feet until it you can tell, versus the tips of your fingers or the tip of your tongue. The barest puff of air in your eye, and 100%
Mhm.
and just how incredibly sensitive, when he starts bringing it down to a weight of 3 milligrams on the fingertips. And if it's been a while since you've played around with like little weights and things, I mean, 3 milligrams is nothing. But the fact that we can pick up those sensations. I couldn't help, both in this section and the one in the next one, thinking of the biblical story of the woman with an issue of blood. And so she seeks healing from Jesus. And how does Jesus know that something has happened? Because in a big crowd of people, he said, "Who touched me?" Now, the theological understanding is, you're assuming Jesus is being touched all over the place because there's all sorts of people crowding around. But whether it was the specific faith of this woman or whatever it was, that there was something about that touch that he felt with a significance, maybe the power of the healing or whatever.
Say something about energy.
Yeah, like there's some, like he had felt the power. So anyway, and it made me think of that mom, that painting in Magdala.
Oh, yeah.
So in Israel and the city of Magdala and the excavations they've done, and when you go downstairs and they've got the stone of this first century city that they've excavated, and you can walk on it, and there's a little altar in a chapel area, this huge painting, and it's a close-up of that moment. Basically, you see the feet of Jesus, and you see the very bottom of his robe, and you see this hand sticking out and a finger, and there's like this burst of light as the finger approaches the garment. And it's just, especially in that place, it was just such a powerful thing to see. And I can't help but think about, as we're talking about the sensitivity of touch, the healing that happens when this woman touches Jesus, and he knows, regardless of how many milligrams of pressure.
And she really just touched his robe.
Yeah, the hem of his garment, which presumably was something that he could feel as well. We get to that in a minute, a little bit later, about how our brain can sort of sift out and sort through sensations and kind of put them on the shelf. We are not typically aware of all the clothing we're wearing constantly. If you think about it, you can feel it, but your brain is not registering every article of clothing on a constant basis. It's just too much information. Like after a moment, your brain's like, okay, you just got a shirt on, move on. Because we almost couldn't process everything happening all at once, constantly. But again, that kind of brought me back to that, she touches the hem of his garment.
Didn't he say that he could feel the energy draining?
Yes, there's a power coming out of him. And so even that garment, for a moment, touching that was enough for Jesus to feel it. I don't know. I could be going a little afield there, but I couldn't help but think of that moment. So there's a specific word, a technical term that he used multiple times, an engineering term, compliancy, and that was pretty essential to this understanding of the importance of skin, compliancy. How did that word strike you? How did you kind of wrap your head around compliancy?
Adaptability.
Okay, adaptability. Yes, absolutely. And what is that like for skin? What's the compliancy of skin about?
It forms around whatever it touches.
Yeah,
It's the hot and cold. You know, as soon as you get close to something really, really cold, you don't touch it. If it's really, really hot, you don't touch it. It's a protection. It's a protection for us out of that adaptability or what was the word? Compliance.
Yeah,
Compliance.
Compliancy.
It's
Yeah. I think of compliance as someone who is agreeable to being told what to do.
Mhm.
And this is not completely different than that, but he calls it a biomechanical term, but about basically its ability to form around whatever it's touching. So that, for instance, I've got a cup right here, and I'm going to pick up the cup, and in very, very subtle ways, between the skin and the fat globules underneath and the collagen and the muscles and everything else, that it's not just like mechanical pinchers, but my hand actually sort of forms around it. And it's not 3 or 4 points of contact. It's sort of molded around this shape. And then I take my hand off and it's exactly the way it was before.
And I wouldn't have thought of in doing this, things inside your hand shift. It says the resulting tissue constantly shifting.
Yeah.
I don't think of my hand changing there when I'm holding.
Right. But although, not thinking of our hand changing or shifting around, but it is all those components on the inside, very subtly changing, moving around, going this way or that way to conform, to comply around whatever shape we're trying to hold, so that we hold it comfortably and naturally and effectively. We hold it in such a way that the grip is snug or it's not painful. If you've ever picked up something that's real pointy or sharp, but you can kind of work your fingers or your hand around it so you can hold it okay. And it's amazing that our hands can actually do that. Can take up that space and sort of reform around where it needs to be in any given circumstance. I mean, it's not exactly silly putty, but it's a lot more pliable than I think we tend to pay attention to.
Dave,
Yeah.
I found that painting or mural you were talking about. I'm going to try to show it because does that show up at all?
A little bit. There's a lot of glare, but you can kind of see the finger and the hem of the garment and a little flash of light. Yeah.
Yeah, it was look at the lady next
Yeah,
to it.
it's
It was
so huge.
cute.
That's the thing. It's way bigger than life size.
Yeah,
It's
you
almost
see no-
overwhelming to be in
Yeah.
its presence.
Yeah, you see no faces, you just see feet in the bottom of the garment in her finger. So it was just an amazing sight, really. Okay, sorry about that.
No, thanks. Thanks for pointing out. It's hard to describe, so.
It is.
So he takes this compliancy a step further and tries to apply it a little bit theologically. And it's doesn't spend a lot of time there, but basically learning something about the way that our skin and our bodies can form around something to then connect it to how we in the church ought to be able to kind of conform and shift for the sake of others.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you take from that?
Well, we have this quote here. We have a clear example of Jesus, who found acceptance among physical and moral outcasts, as well as despised minorities and Roman officers. Somehow he moved compliantly among diverse groups without compromising his good news message of love and forgiveness.
Yeah.
That's a very fine balance. We see this a lot in our political climate right now. You know, how do we live as Christians with some of the things that have been decided in our society that are supposedly okay? Or yeah, I don't want to get into that, but anyway, it's a difficult.
Well, even in just discussing the major election that's going on right now, and if you have people that you're good friends with that don't agree, and you're on a fine line there.
Yeah. So, you know, talking with friends about an election, and if you don't agree, and how do you, and you kind of have to comply and conform one to another. So I don't know if it's the exact opposite, but the word coming to my mind to take the other direction is rigid or rigidity. So if you're compliant, you form around something. If you're rigid, your shape is so secure that it doesn't change no matter what. And, you know, what the skin is doing, it's offering a firmness. Our hands never stop being hands. They're not puddles of goo like melted wax that forms around something. It still maintains its shape in a very significant fashion. It never stops looking like a hand in the least. It's very subtle though, as it can shift and move in order to hold whatever happens to be in its grasp. And you know, whether that's a singular person kind of thing, you know, the action of a Christian, or if it's a congregational thing, you know, how do we stand firm yet, you know, compliant almost sounds difficult to put in that context. Supple, does that change anything? So that, you know, can you be so firm that when somebody comes in, you know, if they're not exactly like you, they just sort of bounce right off? Or is there a way to maintain your shape and integrity, but to receive with some softness that allows people to be held? When you catch a ball, the people who have trouble catching balls, it's typically because they're too hard with their hands. You have to kind of give with it a little bit, and there's a feel to how to absorb some of the momentum in a way that allows you to control it, but stop it. So Tom, you have a preferred grip on your golf clubs, right?
Yes.
And if it's too loose or if it's too tight, it messes you up.
That's absolutely right.
So it's got to be, you know, this kind of, you know, somewhere in between that allows you enough of a grip, you don't lose it, but it's not so rigid that you can maintain flexibility through the swing and contact with the ball and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where we're getting around. The message of the compliancy of the skin may be pointed towards our ability to maintain our integrity, yet receive and almost absorb a little bit the people or the issues that come towards us. They don't just bounce off. They don't just break on us. Maybe the difference between a hug that feels comforting and one that feels very stiff and unnatural. I'm not a super big hugger, but it's just kind of in my temperament to do it. And there's that awkward, like robot hug that some people give. And then there's like that a little too much, like, I guess we're doing this. It's a little much.
Yeah.
So you know, there's a way to embrace, but to kind of do it, I don't know. We're kind of, yeah, but this all sort of follows, right? All right. The next section seems to be just as significant though, and it's not just our ability to touch, but what about our need for touch?
Everybody needs touch.
Something that's been missing a lot in the last few months.
Yeah, it's funny. We're still in a section that we read last year. And I'm reading it again for the first time in many months. And it seems like almost every single chapter, I'm reading it differently because of the pandemic. Touching and not touching means something completely different right now than it meant in January.
I think with this virus and not being able to touch anybody, I mean, I know myself and my family and that, we always touched one another.
Yes.
We always hugged one another, and you felt that love in you. And with this virus, you can't touch anybody.
Yeah, families who are always touching each other are able to feel that love, but with the virus, you can't.
Right?
Yep,
And it makes a difference.
very much so.
You know, we have had some very hard and difficult things here, some deaths that were so profound, and loss and suffering, and to feel like you can't do the most natural. I mean, it's like you have to resist doing what's, you don't even have to think about it, but it's just right to hold someone at that moment.
Yes.
And the fact that we're not doing it, I worry about what that does inside of us that we don't realize.
You can say,
The fact that it's lingering and lingering and lingering.
Yeah, what did you say?
you can say, I know, you know, I can't touch,
Yeah,
but you can't make up for it.
yeah, you can say I can't touch, but you can't really make up for it.
But you don't have
And
that feeling there.
yeah, you don't have the feeling. You can try to express it, and everybody kind of knows it's not on purpose, but we still are missing something, and I think there's an effect. So, like, especially when I'm doing like premarital counseling or something like that, I will fold in Gary Chapman's love languages, because I found a lot of explanatory power in, you know, that we both express and we receive affection and love in these kind of broad categories. And a lot of it's our temperament, or it's how we were raised, but it's kind of unique to us. And learning how the other person receives love best allows you to communicate more clearly. You know, kind of the cliche would be the husband who is always doing things for his wife, and his wife saying, but you never say I love you. And the husband says, but I'm doing it. I say I love you when I do all these things. And she says, but I just want you to say it out loud. And so they have this whole conflict, when the reality is you know, the love is there, but it's not being expressed in a way that's being heard effectively. It's as though two different languages are being spoken, and there's confusion. So anyway, one of the love languages is about touching. There's a physicality to it. And it could be affectionate touching, even sensual touching, whatever, but just some kind of contact. And I remember reading a book, and it might have been his, or it might have been someone else explaining this. But they use the phrase, 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 they There we go. So they use the phrase love tank as like a gas tank. And when the love tank ran empty, the car doesn't go. And it needs to be filled up on a regular basis. And so someone who really responds and needs that physical touch, when they don't have it, it starts to affect them. Just like running low on gas and your car starts to sputter and you lose power and eventually it stops. I was thinking about all these things as we're reading this section about the necessity of touch and what happens when it's not there. And for some people, it's very significant, but it seems that for everyone, it's important. And right now, especially, I have to believe we're feeling it. I have to believe that, and it's not just the big moments of, you know, hugging while we're crying. I mean, just, it's all the incidental contact. You know, you don't shake someone's hand, you don't pat them on the back, you don't give them just a little touch on the shoulder. You know, whatever it is, you know, living a little bubble that we take with us wherever we go. We're not built to do that, at least not for any length of time. And what's going on underneath and inside of us that we might not be aware of because our tank has been running for so low for so long. So in this section, there's a couple of stories given, one with monkeys and one with babies, but kind of remembering the very obvious impact of touch from the very beginning of life. So what happens when that touch is not there?
Oftentimes the child dies.
Yeah.
Don't develop the same.
Yeah, the development isn't the same, and it could be something as significant as death. And even the poor little monkey experiments, which just kind of made me a little sad. But how they would respond to something that was soft, it was almost a little pitiful. But you know, I get it. I get it. If that softness is not there, and then it comes, just how significant it is.
Does it make you wonder if maybe a lot of the deaths from the virus is because these people are not being touched?
You know, I'm gonna, you know, my non-medical opinion is in nursing homes and in rehab facilities, there is an element of despair that is killing people. Now, by that, I mean, they get the virus and they were probably already, you know, with many vulnerabilities to it. But the fact they are separated out from everyone and from everything makes their ability to fight it off that much less. And within that misery, without hope, what happens? I mean, our bodies and our souls are connected. You tell a cancer patient they have no hope, and it makes a difference in how much longer they live. You tell a cancer patient there's hope, and this is what it takes, and just their motivation to try changes how long they live and their quality of life. So imagine, I mean, I think about, and we have parishioners who have known this firsthand. I think about Linda Francis' husband, Ken, who was stuck in that nursing home away from his family for, it was 5 months before he finally contracted the disease. You know, they couldn't be in the same room. And with his impairment, with his memory impairment, he was needing to be constantly told why they couldn't be there.
Mhm.
And I just can't fathom how hard that must have been on him. And then talking to the family, how hard it was on them.
Exactly.
They finally got to touch him for the first time in about 6 months in the hospital as he was dying. And it was a precious, precious gift that they finally had the chance to do that. But the only way that it happened was how imminent his death was about to be. Again, these are all issues that, why would this have even darkened our minds a year ago?
Yeah.
But I can't read this chapter and not think about that. You want to talk about the necessity of touch.
Yes.
I'm not thinking about, Romanian orphanages anymore. I'm thinking about every single day here.
Yes.
It's what is. We know this now. We've been undergoing this experiment daily for months now.
Yeah, and I think even the people that are in acute hospitals.
Oh, yeah.
I was speaking with my sister-in-law yesterday, and my brother-in-law. This is my older sister-in-law, passed away about 6 years ago now. And my brother-in-law married my sister's best friend. He had surgery on my sister's birthday, which was yesterday, for cancer. And Carol, I was talking with Carol, and she said, I can't even talk. I can't even go in with him. I can't even be with him. I can't touch him. I can only call him when he's awake. And I thought, how sad that is, because he's a person that has to be touched. He's a person who is extremely dependent. And if he doesn't make it through, I don't think it's because of the physicalness of the cancer and the medicine. It's more the fact that
Loneliness.
the loneliness and the dependency.
Isolation.
My sister did everything for him, and Carol does everything for him. I mean, she's a twin to my sister, and he just depends on it.
Yeah.
He appreciates it fully also.
Yeah, 100%. It's a real thing.
And he was an only child. And I wonder about all of the people that were in intensive care.
Mhm.
If they could have had the touch, would it have made a difference in the death numbers?
I believe it
That-
would.
That story of the woman that carried the babies around.
Right.
And when the doctors had given up, they turned the baby over to her.
Yeah,
And she just walked around carrying it. That was a beautiful story.
it really was. It really was.
When I was in nursing,
Written by
we-
implication.
when I was in nursing, and we had projects where we had volunteers that would come in and sit with preemies. They had to stay in the the bassinets, so isolation, but they would sit there and put their hands through the little windows and rub their backs and rub their arms just so they could have the touch.
Yeah.
Nurses didn't have time to do it, but the volunteers could do it for hours at times, just so that they had that touch. And I'm sure that it made all the difference in the world in their growth.
Yeah. I think it's, experientially and experimentally, I think we've seen it too many times to know otherwise. It's the way it is. There is something about touch that makes us human. And this last section, he calls it love's medium. And I just think it was just a beautiful way to put it. The medium meaning the manner in which it is expressed or conveyed. Like an artist whose medium is paint or perhaps sculpture, love comes through touch. And whether that's, everything from sensuality and reproduction to just, you talked about if a doctor lays his hand on your shoulder, you assume that the appointment was longer and the appointment was more meaningful. And it almost sounds silly. Like, have you noticed, I'm going to say something about restaurants and how many restaurants we go to anymore, but it was something that just happened a few years ago, and I started seeing it all the time, where the wait staff, when they handed you the bill, would put a little smiley face on it. Because they found out that when they did that, there was a noticeable change in the tips they got. And it's the silliest thing. It's a scribbled smiley face. What in the world is this? How is that such a big deal? Except it is. Put a hand on somebody's shoulder, and even if the hand itself isn't that big of a deal, maybe it's the lack of a hand on a shoulder that's the big deal. Missing it is what's such a big deal.
I know when I was volunteering in the hospital in Port Charlotte, I worked in the ER. There were times when patients would come in and the family would come in and they'd be sitting in the waiting room and they'd be very upset and distraught. And I would go over and sit with them and hold their hands and
Yes.
talk to them. And it would calm them down quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it would give them more of a better feeling that they knew somebody really cared.
Yeah, so volunteering in the hospital and ER and being able to sit with patients and just sitting with them in a hand was made such an enormous difference. They knew somebody cared when that happened. I don't know how to quantify what the tactile touch does, but I don't know. If we all know the phrase talk is cheap. There just feels like there's some kind of extra element when the talk is backed up by even a small touch. It feels more real. And I guess that can make all the difference. And that's really how he ends. He sort of opens up these chapters with a recollection about medical training, and then he closes off each chapter with sort of a personal story about a leprosy patient. And what was the one this time? How did he close off touch?
The fellow had a facial deformity.
Yeah,
And he joked with him about it,
right.
that his face was not so bad. Shouldn't get any worse if you take the medication.
Yeah, and sort of joking that it's more the ladies who worry about the wrinkles and stuff like that. And what's this guy's response?
He cried.
He starts crying. And Dr. Brand is like, oh no, I've offended him by saying this comment about his face. And because it's, they're speaking two different languages and he's not great with it. And he gets the interpreter to try to figure it out. Why is this guy crying?
Because he put his hand on his shoulder,
Yeah, Dr. Brand put his hand on his shoulder to make this dumb joke.
comforted.
And that incidental contact, which Dr. Brand probably didn't even think twice about. And why did this guy cry? Because he hadn't been touched in years.
Yeah.
As soon as they heard leprosy, everyone's given a wide berth. Nobody's going to round him. No one's going to touch him. It's like if you're you go into Publix trying to make your weekly run and you cough.
Oh, boy.
But no one had touched this guy in years. And what was so small and so simple brought him to tears. That's how powerful and how needed touch really is. All right, anything else?
Just hope we can get back to it soon.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We're running on a deficit right now, and you can only do that for so long before it causes real problems. So I certainly hope we can get back to the way life is supposed to be, because when it's not that way, it makes a difference.
I went and got my tank refilled with the great grandbabies yesterday. I got to be with all three of them and get hugs and snuggles, and boy, it made all the difference.
All right, everybody. So we'll be on that next chapter, and we'll get back together next Wednesday. All right.
Okay.
Have
Bye,
a good
everybody.
night. Thank you.